And I'm going to turn it over to Dan for a question on education.
Thanks, Holly. In Philadelphia and throughout the state, charter schools educate a growing number of students. They also are taking up a growing share of education funding in the city. What role do you think charter schools should play in public education? Do you think that oversight needs to be strengthened and that the funding model should be reformed? And if so, how? Let's start with Secretary McGinty.
Thanks very much. And first, in terms of the bigger picture, public education, absolutely top priority, restoring Corbett's $1 billion, no new math here, $1 billion in cuts. That's how much it was, that's how much needs to be restored. And I have proposed a severance tax on shale that I would dedicate dollar for dollar, penny for penny to restoring those dollars. As it relates to the charters, listen, any that are working, I want to support. The ones that aren't, we got to stop. And in terms of the funding, I want to give Auditor General a high five here, Jack Wagner, a high five. It was his report that first uncovered things like the double dip in pensions, $50 million a year. That is an excessive expenditures. We need to stop that. I'm for full accounting and transparency with respect to the reimbursements with charters. We should reimburse on an actual audited cost basis. And I'm very skeptical in terms of cyber charters. We've seen incredible abuse of cyber charters to the tune of $366 million. And I would stop public dollars from going for charters that are run by for-profit organizations. Last thing I would just say, another conversation, but as a mother with 3 kids in the public schools, we absolutely have to reform this excessive standardized testing that has taken the lifeblood out of education.
Thank you. Congresswoman Schwarts.
Yes. So you know, my commitment to education is not only as a public servant, but certainly personally. My kids went to the Philadelphia public schools. I thought it was important for them and important for me and important for the city to have many of us sending our kids to public schools. But I wanted and expected it to be very good public schools. And I think it's a tough go now for a lot of families here in Philadelphia to really be able to trust that their kids will get the kind of top-notch education they should. And whose fault is that? It lays at the governor's feet. I have to say, his $1 billion cuts hits Philadelphia particularly, but it hits Pittsburgh as well, with a 15% cut this year, Philadelphia 23%. And this has really just been undermining who we are and who we can be in this state. If we do not educate our kids well, we are not going to be a great state. We will not grow the economy. We will not be all that we can be. That's what this whole discussion is about. So what we have to do is make the commitment. That is a constitutional requirement that we provide fair funding for our schools. And that means a sustained, fair, adequate funding formula that is non-political, that helps our poorest schools, that ensures that every child, no matter where they live in the state, has access to quality education. That's what I would do as governor. It would be my top priority. It is, again, our constitutional responsibility. It's also our moral responsibility. So that's what I do. I would restore those cuts that Katie talked about. But I would go further. I would say that we've got to have kids start school ready to learn. And that means full-day kindergarten, which I championed when I was Democratic chair of the Education Committee. It means universal pre-K for 4-year-olds in the state. Give them a good start. And yes, rein in those charter schools. That's the easy part. All the other stuff is going to take real work.
Thank you. Auditor General.
Thank you, Katie, for mentioning that report. There's no doubt. I just want to put everything in perspective. We have 500 public schools in Pennsylvania. We now have a new 175 charter and cyber charter schools. We actually should be moving in the opposite direction with consolidation rather than expansion. But there is expansion because parents want alternatives in the educational process. And I support that. And I think the majority of us support that. If you think your child's going to a bad school where it's unsafe, and there are bad schools that are unsafe in Pennsylvania, you should have an alternative. However, we need better checks and balances on the charters and the cybers. You know who creates a charter bricks and mortar school? The school district gives the approval. School district doesn't not have the expertise for oversight of that charter. You know who creates a cyber charter school? The Department of Education. They don't have the oversight. The average cost of educating the child goes to the cyber charter school. The child going to a cyber school has a computer at home. Some school districts are providing $15,000 and $20,000 to the cyber charter school for that child staying at home. It's out of whack. We can save over $300 million of your taxpayer money by simply correcting the funding formula and permitting charter and cyber charter schools to continue to exist.
Thanks, Auditor General. Treasurer.
Yeah, listen, I'm very proud to have the endorsement of the PSEA. That was the result of hundreds of informal and formal interviews and meetings across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You can imagine how education support professionals and professional educators who've often been lampooned by people like Chris Christie, who's proving himself to be a bit of a bully, feel about these issues. And it's serious as a heart attack. We have to channel resources to where they do the most good. And public education dollars do the most good in the least affluent communities. We have the biggest summer fallback problems. We have the biggest need for music programs, the biggest need for customization and tutoring, the biggest need for after-school programs, the biggest need for full-day kindergarten, the biggest need for pre-K programs, and the biggest need for early childhood learning programs, because so much of your capacity to learn is set up by the time you're 4 or 5 just by the number of words that wash over you. And one of the things you need is a governor who will who can drive the conversation towards 2 goals. Ending the rip-offs. People who knowingly are ripping you off. It may be legal, but it's a rip-off when they're charging you for pensions that aren't paid and lunches that aren't served. We need to call them on that, and we need to drive to the basket to get the revenues, to not just to have a fair funding formula, but to invest. Invest in a way that yields a huge return. Invest in public education again.
Thank you. This next question is about incarceration and criminal justice. Since 1980, the number of Pennsylvanians behind bars. The follow-up question on education. Standardized tests play an ever greater role in deciding how teachers are evaluated, whether students graduate, and which schools stay open or close. Do you think testing has too much power over Pennsylvania schools? And do you support the rights of parents to opt their children out of state standardized exams? Let's start with Secretary McGinty.
Well, thank you. And I alluded to this before, but I do want to say something a little bit more about it. I have 3 girls in public school. 2 of them are in 8th grade, and 1 of them is in 7th. One of my 8th graders will sit for 2 months of standardized tests this year. 8 full weeks. The kids started about 2 weeks into school after summer break with one of those standardized tests. Now the teachers are trying desperately to get the kids back out of thinking about being at the beach and back into school, and then they are chained to a desk doing nothing but filling in little black circles. This is the death of our public education. I think obviously we need to be able to know how we're doing. But this is one of these things where the one solution was thought to be good. Well, let's test, let's have some numbers, then became the solution to everything, and it's gotten out of control. I would step way back from that. Starting with individual parents sounds like a good idea to me, and I think you can count me in.
Thank you. Congresswoman.
Let me say, I think that we have the reliance on standardized testing and the amount of time, as Katie points out, on standardized testing in our schools is not helpful. And in fact, there are many teachers who will tell us that the teachers teach to the test. So my feeling, as governor, what I would say, and I actually was a Democratic chair of the Education Committee when some of this was just being talked about. I was not in Congress when we did No Child Left Behind. Good notion. Bad implementation, there's a lot of bad language in that law. We still can't figure out how to go forward on it, but one of the issues that we all agree on is that there's too much testing and too much reliance on the test. So here's what I would say is, as governor, I want to make sure that we can cut back, that we can make those tests a tool for parents, for students and for teachers to be able to, in real time, use those assessments to do best by our kids. And it cannot be, I will make sure that tests are not the only benchmark for students, that it has to be a much broader view of what a student can achieve and how they can achieve. So those are the changes I would make right away.
Thank you. Auditor General.
Testing is overemphasized within the educational process. I went to a parochial grade school and a public high school and a state-owned university, IUP. And all of us know to truly learn, you have to be challenged, you have to be encouraged, you need good teachers, you need good principals. But I'll tell you what we need in Pennsylvania. We need a good Secretary of Education. And we need an engaging Secretary of Education. I don't know who's in control. As a matter of fact, I don't know who the Secretary of Education is. And that concerns me greatly. And as Auditor General, I have to tell you, we initiated a safe school initiative by auditing every public school and looking at the safety parameters incorporated into the school system. It wasn't the Department of Education that did that. It was the Department of Auditor General that did that. We need more leadership in the educational process in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Treasurer.
Yeah, look, again, this is a really personal issue for me. I would have been destroyed by the kind of high-stakes testing that's present today. I'm proud to be endorsed by PSEA, and I've visited and visited and visited. And you go to these schools, really good people who are out of their own wallet buying supplies, support professionals, teachers, nurses, one after another, talk about the traumas of misguided tests. You know, I loved Michael Smerconish had a piece. I disagree with him about some stuff, but he talked about how he tunneled into Lehigh despite low SATs. I'll just tell you, my wife had much, much, much higher SATs. When I met at Harvard, I didn't want her at Harvard. I did not want to tell her what my SAT scores were. So this is boneheaded, but I don't think the solution is to create another, quote, right for parents. We have too many kids who are abandoned because their parents aren't activists. We just need to get it right when it comes to the right kind of testing, using it as a tool and not over-relying in it the way we are today.
Great, thank you very much.